Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversational Witchcraft with me, Dawn the Kitchen Witch. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure you subscribe, hit all the buttons so you know when we have great, fantastic guests like today, the incredible, fantastic, hilarious Jhenah Telyndru. Jhenah is a Celticist, author, and priestess. She founded the Sisterhood of Avalon in 1995 and serves as an academic dean of the Avalonian Theological Seminary. Jhenah hosts residential training retreats around North America and the UK, presents internationally at conferences and festivals, teaches online workshops and immersion programs, and facilitates pilgrimages to sacred sites in the British Isles and Ireland through Mythic Seeker Tours. A priestess in the Avalonian tradition for over 35 years, Jhenah has been following a pagan path since 1986. And we are so excited to have you. Oh my goodness. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
I'm so excited to be here, and especially after that amazing entry. I mean, you're like my hype man. I love that. I'm excited to be here extra now.
We are
No, really.
Literally have been chatting already for like 15 minutes before we even hit the recording button because we're like sisters from another mister. Like it turns out we both kind of had similar upbringings in New York, and we both have crazy Italian backgrounds, and hilarious. You are just a ball of energy. And I was saying, someone who writes on the topics that you write on, and with this humongous list of credentials, I would expect you to be like a little stuffy, but you're super fun, Jhenah.
I'm so glad. I surprise people all the time, and I appreciate that immensely. I think it's better to,
But you're like really
revert
smart,
the
and
expectations.
you're really accomplished, and I think that's fucking impressive, dude. I'm just gonna say that it's just fucking impressive. I was, doing a little bit more research on you, and I learned that you have a degree in archaeology.
Yeah,
Is
my
that
undergraduate degree.
how freaking cool is that? So we need to hear, okay, everybody here really likes to hear origin story, right? So here you are, you're this amazing teacher, and you're, you the founder of this Avalonian priestesshood and all this amazing witchcraft stuff that you do. How the hell did you get here? You know what I mean? Take us to how you found the path of paganism and witchcraft in the first place.
So, gosh, it all starts and ends with Arthur for me, which is kind of a strange thing. I was a very precocious, nerdy child. I read mythology. I loved King Arthur books. And I loved the other world. I loved the magic in them. And I remember thinking when I was a kid, it was especially about the Greco-Roman mythology. I wish I lived in ancient times so I could worship Athena, so I could worship Artemis. For me, it was just like a mind exercise. But then I guess in 86, I discovered the Women's Spirituality book by Diane Stein. And it was this goddess-centered, woman-empowering, political, spiritual kind of movement that really just opened my eyes in so many ways. So my womanhood, my magic, my politics, and my Arthurian mythos nerdity all kind of arose in one multigrain bread that has become me. And but they're very closely linked in my life. So so I got to like channel my nerd into the studies of these ancient cultures, and I love their religion, and I love the interplay between culture and religion, the ways in which the environments of where people arise dictates their relationship with the land, and so also dictates the nature of their deities. And then so just that, like, the god origin story, and then to look at the ways in which literature that kind of flow down what I call the stream of tradition, like the stories of Arthur, for example, have these threads of things that some of them are medieval, some of them are are ancient, are pre-Christian, right?
Right.
And some of them evolve over time. It's Arthurian tradition is very rarely canonical because, you know, since the beginnings in like Wales and Cornwall and such, it's all been like fanfic from there, and he kind of
Right.
conglomerated all of these other stories from. Anyway, so I find it interesting to see the ways in which things arise horizontally, you know, at a plane in time across cultures, but also how they develop vertically and the ways in which they kind of permutate. And it teaches me something about myself. It teaches me something about the nature of spirit. It teaches me something about what we stand to learn from these things.
So cool. So cool.
Mm-hmm.
So was your growing up environment open to this sort of way of thinking, or was your growing up environment that sort of like mine, that closed Catholic, you know, no, it's got to be this. Like you said something earlier just now. You said, I wish I could have lived in those times so I could worship these deities, because maybe you didn't know that was something you were, quote, allowed to do.
I think there's part of that. I mean, I was raised Catholic. I loved the church, you know. I think my biggest piece was, I think I once told my parents, you know, that I'd been considering becoming a nun. And my father's very religious. He's from Italy. He's old school Italian, old world, and matters of theology weren't really discussed. It was just, this is what is right. So I didn't really have a problem. Like, it was like, I didn't leave the church because of politics. It's just it's just that as I shifted, other pieces shifted. So, but I still consider myself and my dad very similar in that we both, you know, revere deity very strongly in our lives. That said, I think for me, it was more a sense of, and don't get me wrong, I read my first book underneath the covers at night. I kind of hid it because I knew that my parents wouldn't have been happy about it. But there was also not even that, there wasn't even a consciousness that people were doing this. Like, this is before the internet. This, you know, this is in the, you know, the early 80s. So it wasn't like, you know, there was some option, you know, you could be Jewish, you could be multiple flavors of Christian, you could be Hindu, you could be Muslim. I mean, I grew up in a very, you know, Brooklyn is very, everybody is there, right? But there was never a, you know, there was never an option to tick. So when I found that, oh my God, there are people doing this here and now in this world, it just shifted everything for me. It was like a dream come true.
That's amazing. And the fact that you had said, you know, there was a moment in time where you were like, well, maybe I'll be a nun to devote myself to spiritual life, devote myself. And in Catholicism, it's very, you know, you could devote yourself to the Virgin Mary. You could devote yourself to Christ. Like, and here you are devoting your life to spirituality, and specifically these traditions of Avalon, which are very female centric. So like, that's pretty fucking cool, because you kind of, I mean, could you be a witchy nun? Like, is that something that's,
I think it is something that, I mean, you know, I'm not saying that they're witchy. I'm sure that they're very centered in there, but I think of the nuns at Solis Breed in Ireland. I mean, they are, you know, Saint Bridget is who they are revering, and they're upholding this community for. But they welcome those of us who see Saint Breed as the goddess Bridget, and we stand side by side, and they share the flames of Bridget with everyone. So I think that there is this sense of, you know, at least that women's flames can, you know, unite, you know, in spirit, whatever that might look like.
And I think that's important to note, right? One of the things for me growing up in that sort of very uptight, for lack of a better term, don't send me letters, people. The Catholic church I grew up in was very uptight until I was in high school and we switched churches. And even then, like, the teaching is very uptight about what women are allowed to be, what women are allowed to do. You know, I can remember, and I was like super involved in my church, like super involved. Like, I loved singing in the church, and I loved teaching
choir,
in every choir, right? And like all those things, like I was going on like teen Christian Catholic retreats. Did you do the, like, right?
Before we did our confirmation, we went on one of those. Yeah.
No, I did it in high school like twice.
Wow.
Like for like 3 or 4 days on the side of a mountain somewhere. And I can remember being there, and I'm like 16 years old, and they wanted you to sign a virginity card. They were handing around like, here's your promise card that you're going to stay a virgin until you got married. And I remember,
in the Catholic Church?
Yes. And
So,
I
I
was
mean,
like,
did you go to Catholic high school then? No,
no.
because we did CCD. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we ever, and again, I graduated high school in 88. So, but I don't think we ever talked about sexuality. There was nothing like that. There was catechism. There was, we learned this. We had these really friendly, workbooks and things like that. I never grew up being Catholic, feeling pressure. I had such a different experience of Catholicism than what seems to be, more prevalent today. And I guess,
I
not
mean,
even so long after I was gone. I'm sorry,
not that long after. I mean, it was the mid 90s,
right?
And early 90s, 93, 94, 95. And, and I'm going, well, I'm not going to sign this. And people are like, what do you mean? And I was like, listen, not that I'm trying to be a giant whore or anything. I mean, I was still, I mean, I was a giant. Listen, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. Okay. But at that point in my life, of course, I was 16. I was still a virgin. And I was like, I'm going to make a promise to God if I'm not sure I can keep it.
Right.
And they were like, but as a girl, you need to make this promise. And I was like, I'm sorry, who are you to tell me what to do with my body? And that was one of the overarching things for me that was uncomfortable as I started to get into being a young woman and going, I don't feel like I have that same level of respect or reverence. I don't see myself in this organization or in these traditions.
You know what it is? I think there's a difference between reverence and blind obedience. You do this because, right? There isn't this sense. I feel like there's an authenticity to say, I mean, I can strive to meet these moral stones, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with those things. There are reasons behind it. I mean, let's leave patriarchal thing aside,
Absolutely.
So all of that, but to say, you know what, I believe in God so much that I don't want to put myself in a position to do something because an external source is making me. I want it to be a real connection. I don't want to, sully my relationship. And I think that's admirable. I think that's what it should be. I think we need to be able to have the sovereignty to make those choices for ourselves.
So were you drawn to the pagan path because of the wonderment and the magic of it, and like you said before, that history element and the mythology element, or were you drawn from it because of feeling more comfortable, closer to your own spirit, away from Catholicism and into a magical practice?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but mostly because I've always had this strong feeling towards divinities, but it was like, oh my gosh, it's permission to do this thing I long for. And to not only to see, so like you said, we did have Mary, we did have female saints to look to. That whole concept of a God that looks like me. I mean, that's groundbreaking. And I think that's such an important piece. But there was also a place for women in these traditions. It wasn't that we had to be the observer who's not supposed to speak. That we can have an active role in being in service to the divine, being in service to our community in a religious sense. So it was like a double whammy for me. It was both the ability for the external work and the potential for the internal connection.
Amazing. So you're a young woman and you're finding the pagan path, and you're going to school for archaeology. Where do these things dovetail? Archaeology, ancient world, witchcraft, and the divine. How do they come together for you? Or did they at the time?
Well, I think that's a piece of it. I always see myself very liminal. Like I love facts. I love science. I love research. I love, I'm not a Celtic reconstructionist, but the methodology behind it, I think, is important to give us a foundation to know what cultural practices we can use to build a practice today. I don't think it has to be exactly the same, but I think it's important. So there's that piece, that I guess is the left side of the brain. And then the right side of the brain is all about that magic and that connection and feeling empowered to transform my life. And by transforming my life, making myself a better servant in the world, right? To help others find that place. And it's just such a beautiful heart piece. And I don't know what I was saying, but I do have the ADHD.
It's totally fine. I'm 100% with you.
Thank you. just giving people at home a little context to the rest of it. But the sense that I don't know. So I love the idea of a little bit of both, like the empowering piece of transformation, of being able to set things into motion with intention, to be able to, perform acts of divination, to receive guidance on my path. And so I don't think it has to be either or. In fact, I found, especially when I did my master's in Celtic Studies, and I did it at the University of Wales, because I wanted to learn Welsh culture from Welsh people. But that going into the journal articles and doing the deep research and reading these, luminaries in the field only deepened my practice and deepened my connection and deepened my understanding. And I truly believe that this is an understanding of culture, an understanding of the people and their environment, informs our connection to that magical current that is inherited. So I think both of them for me have one has fed the other.
Right. How are we going to know what we want to build if we haven't seen the way things were built before? How are we going to know what we want to practice if we don't know how other people do things? How are we going to understand the origins of what we're saying we want to become if we don't study the past?
And how do we connect with these divinities that, we're not just creating an image of a female divinity and putting an ancient name on it. I think that knowing the cultural piece, knowing their feasts and their how they were worshipped and any rites and rituals and their feast days and all of those things, understanding that piece gives us a sense of, oh, these are the things that she's connected to. These are the things he people worked with him in the past. I want to do those same things too, to just build a bridge of connection. So I think that, it's a path into relationship with the divine, and it's an honoring act to know these things, to know their cult centers, to know their prayers and hymns and all of those things.
And that archaeological piece, like you said, that science piece, that almost I can't say the word, anthropological piece, and understanding the groundedness in the people, the geography, how the environment, the climate was at that point, right? When this particular deity was being worshipped because of how they informed the weather, because there was a drought or something in this particular area that went on for years. That all is grounded fact to help inform why a people prayed to this particular deity and wanted to invoke this particular energy.
That's right. And this is the thing that gets me, because so Welsh tradition was written down in the medieval period. The people were already Christian, so the stories remained in orality. They went from gods to sometimes supernatural beings. Like, we can figure out who the gods are, but they're not called them. Right? They're not nowhere in any Welsh mythos. That said, what that sparks is this idea of how stories shift in relationship to cultural needs. So whereas in the beginning, it was important for us to be in relationship with the god of the sea, because that was, to get safe passage, or the goddess of the land so that the crops will grow, like very literal needs of a people. But over time, as humanity's culture has shifted, where, it isn't that life or death struggle, we enter into a more philosophical piece. It kind of shifts. It becomes more metaphorical, or it expands. So, for example, Hades is the god of the other world. The underworld in Greek tradition, but he's also the god of wealth. And why is that? Because the other world is, and it's like this in Celtic tradition as well, in Welsh tradition, is where riches come. It's where fertility comes. It's the gift of the other world, is the creative force. It's where metals and food grows and all of those things. So there's that connection. So that, so even as we as pagans today, as neo-pagans, we're not fighting for survival the ways that the original cultures that birthed these deities first envisioned them. But their image and their shape has shifted over time. It still contains that essence of divinity, but now we can say, what are our needs today? And our needs are, I'm not, literally going out and, but what can I have a bountiful harvest in my life? Or, to get to Avalon, you have to cross over the ninth wave to the other world, or over the lake and part the mists.
Right.
I mean, it's a metaphor for process. I see this as a mythic map. It teaches us how to get to these places. It gives us a reflection that is relevant to the human condition today. You know, my inner
Right.
work, you know, going into the unconscious, going into my past and finding the things that I need to transform how I think about it so that do you know what I mean? And who knows what the next level of evolution of this is. So that's why I think it's important that we tie into the current of what was, you know, so that we understand how to be in relationship with it today. And then because we're communicating with what was, what goes on after us is part of that tradition. And then who knows how people in the future will use these symbols or, you know, connect with these divinities.
Absolutely. And you said something, you had a great phrase there where you said how it informs the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, again, like we go back to that, we don't know where, and that goes to everything. That goes to everything, right? Like, no, we don't necessarily, well, we don't, because we're not farmers, right? So we're not praying to the gods for a bountiful harvest because we're not farmers. We are in the age of convenience. So we walk into Whole Foods and we buy whatever the hell we want, right? However, if we were farmers, we might be like, hey, I need to make sure that I have a bountiful crop so that I can sell these tomatoes to Whole Foods, you know, and Susie soccer mom can buy them at a premium.
And all of those can exist at the same time,
yes.
right? It's as you need it, right?
Yes.
And I think it works the other way too. Like the Holy Grail is the concept of, you know, you have to enliven the wasteland. And what is the wasteland? The wasteland came upon Logres because of the rape of the well maidens, where the bounty of the other world was abused. The person that was the emissary from the other world that gave freely was raped. Her cup was stolen, and this happened across the land, and the wells went silent and the wasteland descended. And that's where the Grail came in. The Grail was supposed to, you know, re-enliven the lands. And it harkens back to the old sovereignty myths. But all of that to say, you know, we are in the same position today. We are rapine in our exploitation of this planet, and we are in the wasteland. The world is on fire, or it's underwater,
or drowning.
There are plagues, and you know, and it's because we are not in right relationship with our land. And in this case, our land is the globe. We're the global community now, and so the same lesson can persist. Things can persist because they still have something to teach us. There is deep wisdom in that, whether you're talking about a local community and not defiling the well that they rely upon for their water, or we're talking about the entire globe and the catastrophic, you know, results of our actions. We are called to, you know, revive the wasteland, to come back into balance, to come back into the right relationship.
And a lot of those things, in my very humble opinion, are cyclical. Right?
Oh, yes.
Right. We have been here before and we will be here again. And then after we are gone, our earth will still be here. And another cycle of humanity will go through this again. And it will be prosperous and then wasteland, and then prosperous and then wasteland. And throughout it, people will find reason. They will find spirit. They will find all the things that we are finding now, and go through that cycle once again.
Beautifully said.
And so these symbols and legends and deities, and even, and I'm not to just get way out, you know, like you were saying, you have ADHD, right? I'm like way out there now. And I'm going, you know, whatever it is that we believe in, pray to, however we define our spirituality, whatever God you recognize, these are all ways for us as human beings to interpret the world around us.
Yes.
There are ways for us to understand things and find connection to things we don't necessarily get, right?
And how we receive that information is determined by our frame of reference. So if we are spiritual people, we're going to see it as speaking through spirit. If we're scientific people, we're going to look for the patterns that make that arise. If we're musical, or if we're poetic, or if we're, you know, I think that that's part of the piece too, is that, you know, we're going to see things and we're going to interpret them with the language that we possess.
Right.
And so it's important for us to have, I think, this diversity of language.
So then when you look back on your own personal path of understanding through, as we bringing the conversation full circle, right? Understanding that,
Cycles.
that history part, that archaeological part, that science part, and then that spirit part is all interpretation for you to compute the world around you and take that in and then give it back.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think it
Brilliant.
is. I think it is. And I think, like I said, it depends. Like I went to chiropractic school, and I took a lot of, I'm not a chiropractor, but I was, anyway, but I took a lot of high, graduate level, anatomy, physiology courses, biochemistry, all of these things. And I was recognizing in these cellular processes, in these chemical, formula, the fundamental principles that you learn in magic, that you see in, the same patterns exist in culture. And it's just a different way that the universe is expressing the same thing. And that for me shifted so much of my connection, so much of my understanding of magic, of the world.
Yes.
I mean, I studied Kabbalah, but it was these, and Hermetics, but it was these pieces where I was like, oh, I see that this is saying the same thing as that in a different human language, in a different way of perception.
Those juicy bits in between that you're like, wait a second, this is a science. I'm such a nerd and I love neuroscience. I'm really not a book smart person, right? I didn't do well in school. I read a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and what surprises me, that fascinates me, the things that I like to learn are about psychology, neuroscience, communicating between human beings, and the reasons why we communicate in the ways that we do. Aside from witchcraft, paganism, cooking, and anything nerdy, right? So like anything about Star Wars. Right. So
it's a complex tapestry.
It's a complex tapestry. Yes. So what I found interesting, and this is a few years ago, and kind of going through some business books and things like that. I'm trying to, teach myself certain things in terms of, a business acumen. And I'm listening to these books and I'm reading these books and I'm like, this is fucking witchcraft. They're talking about intention setting and visualization and ritual. And I'm like,
love it.
This is witchcraft. Like, that's what you're doing, right?
Right. Money's not real anyway. It's all an idea. It's a concept. What's the stock market? Show it to me.
Right. And the mentality of drawing prosperity and what do we put out there for prosperity? It's all interpretation, right? So who are the gods? Who are the deities? How are we moving through the world in a way that aligns us with these particular energies? And we just kind of, the beautiful thing about being a pagan is you get to choose which ones you want to talk to, recognize, and hang out with. You're not stuck with the one that works for your great grandma. You get to pick one for yourself, or
perfect
multiple.
For ADHD people.
Right. Right. But I feel like a little of this today, and I feel like a little of that. And today I feel like a kate, like,
I can do all of it at one time,
or all at the same time. Exactly. And it's just, fantastic. Okay. So we have to take a quick break. We have to hear from our sponsors. And then when we get back from the break, we're going to take a deep dive into your latest amazing creation, because that's what we're here to talk about. Okay. Okay. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Conversational Witchcraft. We are having a very lively, fun conversation with Jhenah Telyndru. And like we've talked about fucking everything and it's awesome. But now we're going to get into like your actual work that you have put out into the world. This is your creative force, your intellectual force all come together. And you have quite a few publications out there and you've been teaching for a long time. But your newest book, I have an advanced copy. Do you have an advanced copy yet? I have an advanced
copy. It's out now. It is actually.
It is out now.
Oh, you have an old? So that's the old title.
This is the old title. I wanted to ask you, because this one says Awakening Avalon, but in your bio, it said the Ninefold
Way of Avalon.
Way of Avalon. So the real title is the Ninefold Way of Avalon.
That's right. We had a last minute title change. So that was caught in mid-production, I suppose, of the things.
But I mean, still, it's beautiful. I mean, all the inside is the same. All the guts are the same.
The guts are the same.
I could dye my hair blonde. I'd still be the same person. It's so before we get into this amazingness, for people who maybe don't know, Can you give us like a tiny little synopsis of what is Avalon and what does it mean to be a priestess of Avalon?
So that's the book. So what is Avalon? Avalon is a lot of things. Avalon comes to us from British tradition, from Brythonic, Celtic, which becomes Welsh tradition. We know of it from Arthurian tradition. It is an island of the other world. It is a place most famously known as where Arthur was taken after his last battle to be healed of his wounds. And so he remains there, this once and future king, healed and ready for when Britain has most need of him. And so he was a very popular, he's a culture hero, and stories of Avalon attach themselves to him, but we believe it to have been an island in the other world. It is its basis in these historical, the Greeks and the Romans talked about these ninefold sisterhoods, these well, they're in a lot of different Indo-European cultures that we know in myth, but also in the Roman historical record. There are the Galicinae and then the Nominate women. There are these islands of priestesses. They were Gaulish, so Celtic Gaulish priestesses living off the coast of Brittany or France. And so it is an idea, I think, that is informed by several different currents and that has gathered together in the stream of tradition that we call Avalon.
And so said to be King Arthur's resting place, right? Who else inhabits Avalon?
Well, the earliest record we have about Avalon comes to us from Geoffrey of Monmouth, and this is the early 1100s. And he wrote about Avalon, first of all, as the place where Excalibur was forged, and that it was ruled by 9 sisters. Morgan is the chief among them, and they were learned women, and they were healers, and they were shapeshifters, and they knew mathematics and music, and they ruled an island that was governed by fair laws, and people who lived there were healthy and they lived long lives. So it's this island paradise, and over time, Avalon shifted as again, culture shifts and connection with women and women's magic shifts. So Morgan starts off as Arthur's, greatest ally, and she ends up as his greatest nemesis for a lot of different reasons. But in the end, she's always part of that group that takes Arthur as he's dying to Avalon. She is always that threshold, that psychopomp that brings him there.
Amazing. So let me ask you this question. What do people get wrong about Avalon and the Arthurian legend? And what would you like to, there's so much, right? I'm sure I have so much of it wrong. But what do you want to debunk? If you could debunk 1 or 2 things, what would they be? Common misconceptions.
I think that there isn't a sense that, people like, what is the real story of Arthur? And you can't really point at it because it's a tradition that has been evolving over 1,000 years. There are stories that come from different places. So some of the things that we most associate with Arthur, like the sword from the stone and the round table and Lancelot, those are all, Breton and French additions to the tale. None of that comes from the original story. And
really?
So it's kind of interesting. And So it evolves in stages, and there are stories that come from Germany, there are stories that come from Spain, and it was everywhere. In some traditions, Avalon is Mount Etna in Sicily, So I think that that's an important piece to understand, that it's more of a continuum. It isn't it's more of a spectrum than a continuum, actually. So I think that's the thing. You need to, when you talk about Arthur, you need to think about what period, what culture are we talking about? And what we have today was kind of set into, cohesion by Mallory in the 1400s. And then we had Yeats who picked up and did, not Yeats, what's his name? Tennyson and, the Idols of the King, and then all into what we have today, all the novelizations and the movies, and from the Victorian period onward. And I think one other piece, I know you asked for 2, 3 things, is that I don't know that anything is wrong when it comes to it. Like, there are things that have shifted, and there are a lot of people, especially in the UK, who sees a strong Arthurian spiritual path, and symbolizes Merlin and Morgan in different ways, and sees Avalon in different ways, and all of these mythos. But I think that because it has such a rich connection, and it has Arthur by nature. This is part of what I learned in my program. The scholarship says that so many stories attach themselves to Arthur over time. He was like the Borg of Western literary tradition.
I love that you used a Star Trek reference. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
His resistance is futile. That's fantastic.
So it took all of these elements from all these different things. So I think the canonical thing about Arthurian tradition is that there is tradition and there is a stream of it, and it does evolve over time. But in the end, we've received it and it's still growing, it's still changing. And I think because it's based in that stream, that it continues to grow. I think it's part of that. So yeah.
I love that you said that there's nothing inaccurate, right? Because it's all about, like you said, I'm sorry.
Just to say there's nothing inaccurate ways of being in relationship with it or to grow it. But I will say that, don't say the story of Arthur, right, is only this, because there are people who study this and will tell you all of the things in the way forwards and all of that, who would probably disagree with that. But I'm just talking about being in relation. Okay.
I think that was a very important distinction to make, because it's just like any spiritual path.
Can't just make it up.
But what works for you is what works for you. So I can't judge that's not the right way to do that. That's not the right way to work with the priestesses of Avalon because I do it this way.
Yes.
Factually,
yes.
Are there any facts that people are incorrect about? Like, or are there any facts that are real? Like factual, not truth and feeling and spirit, but facts.
Something you can find in the literature, something you can find in the lore.
In a museum.
In a museum.
Oh
my God. I mean, I think that things like Excalibur going into the lake may be a reflection of the fact that the Celts used to give the Celts at the various Celtic tribes. There isn't just one Celtic, just to be sure. So the British Celts used to break their swords or create swords to give as offerings to the gods, cauldrons to give as offerings to the gods. So the fact that this idea that, water as that intermediary between this world and the other world, that, it's symbolic that the sword from the lake is the granting of sovereignty from the other world, which harkens back to the sovereignty traditions. And I think it's also a piece that, perhaps the story of that may have arisen from someone saying, oh, we found this like cache of swords in this lake, not knowing the history behind it, and stories arise from that. So I think that it can be dual pronged. And I guess the other thing that I see a lot has to do with Morgan. There's a lot of stuff with Morgan. People believe that she is either the Welsh reflection of the Morgan, and they think Morgan Le Fay is the same as Morgause. So Morgan Le Fay is not the one who had the incestuous relationship. She's not the mother of Mordred, right? So most people and I think that's probably
it's muddy. No one
Avalon
really
thing.
Like, I don't know, like what's because there's so many different things. There's Morgan, the Morgan, Morgaine,
right.
But they're different. They're all different.
They're different, and they're different cultural. So the Irish tradition, the Morrigan, her cognate is actually Rhiannon. Her name means great queen or divine queen, and so does Rhiannon. So these are different goddesses. But Morgan, that means sea-born in the Brythonic language. So she's more, and there's a whole class of water fae in Welsh, in Brythonic tradition, because also Cornish and Breton, called Morgans, Morgen. And when she's first in writing, that's how her name is spelled, Morgen, and then it later becomes Morgan with an A. So that's the thing too. When stories were first written down, a lot of these spellings weren't, because a lot of it was coming from oral tradition. So a lot of these spellings weren't set. So we get the 19,851 ways of spelling any particular person. So it makes it hard to kind of trace things as well.
And I made a terrible mistake. I was talking with someone who lives in their spiritual practice and service of Morgan, and I was saying the Morgan, and they were like, and I kept referring, and like in the break they were like, listen, you're misnaming my goddess, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't like that's not someone I generally, neither of those are deity I usually work with, so I didn't really, there's such a subtle difference that I was unaware of. So I really have to apologize for that, but it's out of my purview. It's not something, I mean, I'm fascinated by the legend, but it's not something that I personally work with. So this conversation is,
it's not your fandom.
Well, the fiction is, You know, I mean, in fact,
but
I'm rewatching the BBC Merlin for like the fourth time because it's just such a fun show. I hope that's not offensive. Is that offensive?
No, I've never actually watched it. I do actually. I have to say, where my nerdity snottiness kind of comes out is when I see some of these things like, oh man, that's not
that's not accurate.
That's not, yeah. It's the wrong time period.
It's
you got the plate mail. No,
weird. That's
exactly. Yes. That's not what a court looked like back in the day.
Yes.
So that's annoying. The anachronisms kind of piss me off a little bit. But.
Do you have a favorite fiction of Arthurian legend?
Well, I guess so I loved Excalibur. I mean, it does Mallory really well. The 80s Excalibur. It does Mallory beautifully, and I love the cinematography and just the whole feeling it evokes. Like it's beautifully done. And similarly, I loved the Green Knight that just came out. They kind of shift the story a little bit at the end, which I was like, oh, but oh my god, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I loved the Mists of Avalon. I got it. I was in the science fiction book club, and I forgot to send the thing back, and I got two hardcovers: the novelization of Return of the Jedi, and which I took as a sign because I was a big Star Wars nerd. And the Mists of Avalon, which had just come out, and it was this big honking book, and I was 13, but I was like, I can do this because I was doing all the Arthurian stuff anyway, and I loved it. Loved it. I mean, all of the stuff that we know today, different aside, and I will say, if I can bring it up, there are people who are like, you shouldn't base your religion on a fiction book. Like they think the Sisterhood of Avalon and the Avalonian tradition is kind of Mist of Avalon cosplay, but I mean, I think anything that is similar is because it's based on the same source materials, but certainly not the it's not our holy book.
And I'm also going to say this, fucking, what is it, Scientology, like
right, Dianetics, I mean, Church of All
can
Worlds,
we just whatever works for you if you're not hurting anybody, okay, right? But the thing is that you're not basing, if you are a devotee to any of these goddesses, gods, ideals, the fae, like all of these things that weave themselves through the Arthurian legend, all you're doing, as we said earlier, is interpreting your human experience through these energies to help you understand spirituality or your spirituality. So fucking worship and fuck those people. I'm just saying. I'm sorry. It got me all riled, and my New York is coming out.
That's all right.
But listen, I think for a lot of people, especially growing up in the 80s and 90s, our first introductions, our first moments of realizing that there was something out there that was different were movies and books and television and things that made you go, wait, magic? Wait, spirit. Oh, what do you mean? And piqued your interest, that opened that door for learning. Wait, Avalon was meant to be a real place? Is it? Can we find it? Let's go see.
Exactly. So on the nose, and Mists of Avalon especially, and not just people who are interested in the Avalonian tradition. I mean, just people got into goddess worship and and paganism and Wicca because it was like the portal of entry for so many people. Right. Her, Lorena McKennitt music. I mean, it was all kind of in the same, Enya, all in the same era. And I want to say, if I can say something really quickly, one of the things that I talk about in the book, so we are talking about the book, is this idea that in Welsh, the word for the other world is Annwn or Annwfn, which means the not world or the very deep. So the not world to me is anything that's not of this world. There is the three realms. There's realm of sky above, which I see as the future, the mental, the potential, right? What has not yet been. And then the realm of sea, which is the past, what has been, what was, the realm of the ancestors, right? That piece. So what is no longer and what has yet to be, or is not, or has the potential of being, are both parts of the other world. And so history, you can say, is the past. It is the realm of sea, but ideas and thoughts and literature of that mental mind, of those thought patterns, of potentialities that they're potentials that have been realized somewhat, but they don't exactly exist. And I think they're part of the other world as well. So legend is part of the other world, myth is part of the other world. And so how is that different in the end, right? I feel like they're both entwined, with this being the realm of land between. This is the place of causality, it is the place of creation, it is the place where we bridge, we bring potential crystals into being, and we release that which doesn't serve us into the past, or bring back things from the past, and set our motion into motion a future that we wish to realize. And so I feel like, then what difference does it make if it's a piece of literature that inspires you to shift and change, or a canonical piece of history that we can practice today? I think it can do the same thing.
So true. And I love that idea of, we are often in a ritual, and it's, above, below, and within. And that idea of these three realms of past, or dead, or, I don't want to say dead, but like previously living, because they're still in spirit, but not necessarily dead. And then, something above, something that is, of imagination, of that above world, and then within being me, being grounded in this practice, in this moment, in this body, in the middle, like you said. And we are the linchpin that holds those things together. Right? So beautiful. What do you hope people will walk away from in this new book? What do you think? What's your hope that somebody's going to pick up this book and read it, and they're going to take from it?
Thank you for asking that. I've been saying that this is my mullet book. It's all the academia in the front and all the practice in the back. And so I think it'll appeal to a wide range of people. I go deep. I wish this was the book I had when I started down the Avalon path. I mean, truly, I've been writing this book my whole life. But I pulled together all of the sources, all of the research, both of what Avalon was, those streams of, currents that inform her tradition, those ninefold sisterhoods. I look at lore, I look at legend, I look at history, I look at holy women over time. What were priestesses like? What were druidesses? Who were these women? What actual true history and archaeology, what do we have from them? And also looking at them in legend as well, because there is a bit of a crossover, which is a whole thing. So it's part of culture. So that's the beginning of the book, and that forms the foundation of what comes after, where I talk about how I found the ninefold in Avalon. We only have these little breadcrumb trails. We don't have a lot of information, and who they are and how to connect with them. And then I lay out a step-by-step practice to coming into personal relationship. You want to, I talk about these ninefold paths, these multiple ways of being a bridge into connection with source. And it's about mastery. It's not about, we think of a priestess today. We think about, people who facilitate rituals or are healers or do divination, but there are other ways of being in divine service. There's the priestess scholar, there's the priestess activist, there's the priestess, community builder, the priestess artisan. There's so many ways we can be in divine service. And so it talks about that piece of how we can become sovereign and how we can find our sovereign service, and step by step to come into relationship with the ninefold, especially through the focus of Avalon. So it is both. It's going to feed your mind and it'll feed your spirit. And perhaps so I would say to this, people who are Celtic Reconstructionists, people who love the history, you may look at it and say, oh, this has got, but look at the front of the book. And if you look at stuff, you're like, boring, which, I get it. It's not for everyone. That's why there are priestess scholars and priestess, there are different ways, right? Different ways. And I think the thing is that if we pull all of those pieces together, we don't all have to be everything, but if we find the thing that burns in our hearts, where the Awen lies, and we can give that out in the world, we can share that gift, whatever that is, then we don't all have to do it. I can write the books about this particular thing, and other people, but you can do the community building, the other person can, you know what I'm saying? And then together we're stronger. That's, I think the thing is about being in community, and a community that honors and incorporates and uplifts the gifts, the dreams, and the practices of everyone.
So well said. So well said. Jhenah Telyndru, wow. I just feel like you've completely blown my mind. This has just been the best conversation. This book is so exciting. There's, like you said, there's so much information. So like, if you're in it for just the academic stuff, you've got that in there. If you're in that for the spiritual stuff, you've got that in there. But one informs the other, and you do it with such care and such reverence and such love and such commitment. It's obvious that this is your heart, and you've been doing it for your whole life, because it's in every page, it's just incredible. tell everyone where they can buy this amazing book. This episode is not going to air. Like, we're recording this, just so you guys know, we're recording this in the summer, and this is not going to air until like December. So, so imagine
Hello,
this.
future people.
Hello, future people. We hope you're staying warm. Where can everybody buy this book, and how can we follow you online and learn from you, or maybe go on one of your amazing pilgrimages?
Yes, I'm packing for one now.
I want to go with you.
Well, we're doing one next year. So that said, thank you. You can buy it everywhere. It's on all of the places. Please, patronize your independent booksellers.
Yes, local books, local bookstores.
But if you have to, do the online thing, then you know where to get it. It's everywhere. The Ninefold Way of Avalon. Thank you. And you can find me. I'm on most of the social media things. InnisAvalon.com is my website. It's YNYSAFALLON, which is the Welsh Innis Avalon. For Avalon, the island of Avalon.com. Sisterhood.avalon.org. My name. Just look me up. I'm on all the places. I'm the only one with that name. So if you see it, it's me.
And we will put all of those links all of that everywhere on our show notes. So if you didn't get that, or you need that spelling, we'll put it right there and you'll be able to find it. Okay. Last question. I ask this to everyone that comes on the show. The question is, if you could have me as a kitchen witch make you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Well, I mean, it would have to be something Italian. What part of Italy are your folk from?
My one side of my family is Napolitan, and the other side of my family is Sicilian.
Okay. So my family is from the Naples region as well, from Avellino, which means the apple, place of apples, which is fun. But anyway, gosh, so I don't know. Do you make a homemade manicotti with the
I don't make homemade pasta. That tradition, isn't that sad? That tradition died with my great grandparents. So I have one photograph of my great grandparents, Michael and Teresa, and they are making ravioli from scratch. Right now,
my grandma used to.
Right. By the time my grandmother was old enough to have her own family, she had 4 kids. She was a World War II bride. She's like, screw this. I don't get time for making my own ravioli,
So
that wasn't something that was passed down. Right. But I do make some mean brajol. So,
oh God, I have not.
Right. In like
ages.
Right. Are you a meat eater?
I'm like 90%. I was a vegetarian for a long time, but then I had to add some protein back into my diet. So, but I don't cook it at home. Oh, I would eat the hell out of a brajol. One of those falling apart brajols.
Yeah, with the garlic and the parsley in the middle.
Yeah. And you got the roll. You got the
yes. And my grandmother only made brajol for very special occasions. Because that cut of meat, that very, very thin cut meat, was expensive, right? So maybe once a year, maybe Christmas Eve, we would have brajol. Okay, so
Christmas Day, because we did the 7 fishes on Christmas Eve.
We didn't do the 7 fishes. She didn't like the fishes. And I didn't really grow up knowing my Sicilian side, my dad's side of the family. So maybe they did fishes. I don't know. When I first got married, I was like, I want to do the 7 fishes. And we were still living in New York at the time, and we had the families over, and I did all the fishes. And my father-in-law, everybody ate it. My father-in-law, who is not Italian, who loves fish. It was my husband and I's first Christmas together. And he's sitting there with like a big plate of like fried fish and shrimp scampi. And he looks up at my husband and he goes, "You married the right one."
I was like, I love that. I
win. I would make you brajol. So if you're ever up here in New Hampshire, visiting maybe the Temple of Witchcraft, you come and you see me.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And I'll make brajol for Christopher too. He probably, he'd eat
I'm sure he loves it. Yeah. He's Italian, right?
Yeah. His mom was Italian. Jhenah Telyndru, you're amazing. I am so happy that we finally got to meet.
I've loved this so much. I feel like I'm talking to an old friend. I really appreciate this conversation.
Like a second. Yeah, we totally know each other. You're amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Let's do it again.
Let's do it.
And until next time, everyone, I wish you all the blessings in the world and so much gratitude.